As we approach the 2022 midterms, state election officials around the country are pleading for assistance in what they're calling a two-front war. Every day, they're keeping up the fight against conspiracy theories, disinformation, and all kinds of stuff related to the 2020 election. It's nuts out there. But at the same time, they're working to counter those narratives aimed at undermining the legitimacy of the upcoming midterms. As Politico reports in a disturbing new piece, election officials are no longer just running elections. They've become full-time mythbusters, contending with information threats coming from the other side of the globe even, and their own ranks. This comes as a recent NPR Ipsos polling finds a majority of Americans, 64%, believe U.S. democracy is in crisis and at risk of failing. In short, the state of our union is not strong, and joining us now is someone literally on the front lines of the disinformation war, Arizona Secretary of State and Arizona gubernatorial candidate, Katie Hobbs. Katie, welcome. So, Madam Secretary, as I understand, you're facing a two-pronged problem here. At the same time you're trying to combat misinformation about the 2020 election, you're also watching radical Republicans in your state and elsewhere who've already internalized the big lie campaign for key offices in Arizona. How are you and your allies responding to that?
Well, fortunately, we had practice battling misinformation in the 2020 election. And so we put in place a lot of practices that are going to help us going into 2022, working to continue fighting this fight. And, you know, really, I think that disinformation is one of the biggest threats to not just elections in the future, but people's continued trust in government institutions. And so we are equipping voters with the right information and working as diligently as we can to make sure that people are sharing trusted information and not the bad information.
So to that point, your opponent in the Arizona governor's race has openly declared that if he was Secretary of State in 2020, Trump would be president at this moment. Now, is your opponent representative of the average sort of Republican voice running for state offices, not just in Arizona, but around the country? How do you see that narrative taking hold?
Yeah, you're referring to Mark Fincham, who is an actual insurrectionist. He's actually running to replace me as Secretary of State. But his narrative is indicative of what Republicans across the state in big primaries are talking to their base about. And so folks in the primary for governor and the primary for U.S. Senate have all echoed this kind of rhetoric. It's pretty alarming and shows you how tenuous our democracy still is. We held on in 2020 because people of both parties did their jobs. They upheld the will of the voters, and they weren't trying to put their thumb on the scale because they didn't like the outcome of the election. And, you know, depending on how elections go in 2022, that can determine the future of free and fair elections in our country.
So speaking about thumb on the scale, I want to take you back to the 2018 Georgia governor's race, where Brian Kemp was running against Stacey Abrams and serving at that same time as Secretary of State, and it was actively overseeing the race that he was in. He used that position to, close some 200 polling places, block thousands of voter registrations. Clearly, these types of state offices are incredibly important, and scores of them are about to be won by, outright conspiracy theorists. How do you assess what this country's electoral process looks like if they are successful in putting their thumb on the scale the way they claim they want to?
Well, I mean, I certainly think that folks might make the same claims about Arizona, but what I remind people constantly is that I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and laws of the state of Arizona, and that's what we did in 2020, and it's what we'll do in 2022, regardless of my position on the ballot and the office I'm running for and the office I hold now. I'm conducting myself in a nonpartisan, impartial manner and working to ensure that every single eligible Arizonan has access to the ballot, as election officials across the country should be doing. We are in peril if we have people in these offices who aren't focused on the process, but rather the outcome. And we have to make sure that we're doing everything to continue to ensure access to the ballot in every way possible.
So as you get ready for the fall campaign, which you're on the ballot, but also serving an important role in the state, what's your gravest concern as these 2022 midterms come upon us?
Well, the misinformation, the disinformation that we've talked about is certainly a grave concern. And, in Arizona, we were successful in ensuring that voters had accurate information. The legislature is continuing to try to tie my office's hands in continuing to provide that accurate information so that people can participate in the process. We're going to keep doing what we need to do to counter that. But the misinformation continues to be a really big concern.
A little bit earlier, I mentioned new polling that shows how the American people are feeling about the health of the country. 68% of Democrats expressed concern. But even more interesting, a greater number of Republicans, 79%, stated that the American democracy is at risk of failing. What do you make of that? Is there a window of opportunity?
Well, I think, unfortunately, a lot of these people are being misled by elected and formerly elected leaders who are upset about the outcome of the election. And it serves their purpose to have these people believing lies, to be honest. And we have to continue to tell the truth. And I think this whole moment that we're in is part of why people feel so concerned about the state of our democracy and the health of our democracy. We have to make sure that we have elected officials that are going to continue to tell the truth and do their constitutional obligations and not lie to people and not actively undermine and overturn the will of the voters.
Secretary Hobbs, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. I really appreciate it. Ahead, the Ohio mayor who suggested that ice fishing leads to prostitution. Yeah, let that sink in. He's now on a little thin ice himself. An update next.